But today we are in a series. This is number 4, and next week we'll conclude the series. But today I want to just share real quickly with you a little bit about David. Everybody say David. Now, I don't know if you remember middle school. How many remember middle school? Or some of you are in middle school right now. Middle school was a tough time. A tough time for me because it was an awkward stage. I was super skinny when I was in 7th and 8th grade, but I had huge hair. My hair was like massive. Like, I had a lot of hair. I was looking at my hair today and I'm like, man, I'm losing my hair. But I had a full head of hair, and I had the mullet going on in the back, and that was a little bit later on, but I remember the angel flights, black angel flights. I remember the black silk shirt with the sunset on the back and the platform shoe. How many you had that? Come on, the angel flights. I'm really old now. All right, that was late 70s, I think. 76, 78, somewhere around there. But middle school, I mean, it was awkward. But bell bottoms, think about that. The terry cloth shirts with a V-neck. I mean, I was in style. But David was in middle school. When he was in middle school, there was a prophet that came to his house. And this prophet was pretty much the leading guy of the authority. There was King Saul, but Samuel was like the leading prophet. And he came to David's house, and David's father, his name was Jesse. And basically, Samuel was on this mission. Everybody say mission. He was on this mission, but it was a secret mission from God. You see, Samuel was to go there and to anoint the next king of Israel. So that's why it was a secret mission. Nobody knew exactly what he was going to do. And so he goes to Jesse's house and he says, gather all your family together because I'm here. We're going to do a special sacrifice, all right? So I want your whole family to join me on this special sacrifice. And the thing of it is, Samuel thought, if I could just see the boys, if I could see all the sons, and then I'll know exactly, God will speak to me, that's the one that's going to be the next king of Israel. And so all the family came, all the sons came, and they were there for the sacrifice, and gathers them all together. And the Bible says that when they arrived, Samuel saw Eliab. Now Eliab was the oldest kid, the oldest son of Jesse. And Samuel looks at Eliab and he says, oh, this is it. That's the guy. That's the guy. Because after all, he's the oldest. And, that's kind of what it is. And in other words, man, this is easy. Firstborn kid, man, I'm done. I'm out of here. Let's go. Forget the sacrifice. Let's go. But God was like, Samuel, no. He is not the one. The Bible says, do not consider his appearance. Everybody say appearance. Appearance. We have a hard time with appearance. We're all about appearance, aren't we? I mean, some of us, we're so into our appearance. Others, we're so insecure about our appearance. When you meet somebody, the first thing that we notice is people's appearance. And the statistics tell us, or surveys have said, that the first thing that we notice about a person, you know what it is when we meet someone? It's their teeth. Some of you are like, oh my gosh, I'm going to hide my teeth today. It's their teeth. So we're into appearances. We're judging people based upon appearances, okay? But Samuel is looking and he sees, man, this has got to be it. And the Lord says, don't consider his appearance or his height, because he was a tall guy. God says, for I have rejected him. Why? Because God does not look on the outside, guys. Aren't you so thankful for that today? Amen? God is not worried about our appearance. God is worried about the heart. God sees the heart. And so Samuel kind of goes down the line of the sons, and he gets to the 6th son, and still he hears nothing from God. He's like, oh my goodness, did I not hear God? Did I make a mistake in coming here? I can see that Samuel probably would be a bit frustrated. And maybe you've been there before. where you were frustrated with God? You thought you were doing something that God wanted you to do, and you're like at a certain place, and you're like, wait, did I hear God right? Was I supposed to do this? Was I supposed to be here? And all these thoughts go through your head. And Samuel is kind of like in this awkward moment, and he asks Jesse, I know I've asked for your whole family to be here, but is this your whole family? I asked you to bring them all for the sacrifice. And Jesse looks around and he realizes, oh, my bad, I'm sorry. Yeah, I have a younger son. The youngest son, he's just a kid. He's out taking care of the sheep. And Samuel's like, go get that kid, please. And I know most of you have heard this story probably when you were a kid, maybe in Sunday school. But when David shows up, when David comes through the door, I mean, he's only like 13 or 14 years old, just a shepherd boy. I mean, he comes through the door, he probably reeks of sheep stuff, you know. I mean, he's been out in the sun, he's probably sweaty, and God says to Samuel, that's the one. God says, Samuel, that's the one I want. Go and anoint him. Anoint him. Anoint that kid. So Samuel goes up to the middle school kid, the middle school student, and pours oil over his head, blesses him, and then leaves. And the whole family is like looking around like, what just happened here? You see, we've got no indication at all that Samuel even told Jesse that when he anointed David, that it wasn't for a specific reason. So we don't really know what happened there. But here's what we do know. Since David was a little boy and into his pre-teen years, David knew that God had something special for him. Even as a little boy, God was stirring inside of his heart. And about 18 months after David was anointed, that moment, 18 months later, David kills Goliath. And at that time, David becomes the most popular person in all of Israel. I mean, he's just a kid. He's just 15 years old. And for the next 7 years, he has found favor in the eyes of King Saul. I mean, it was just like wonderful. Everybody was singing about David, loving on David. David was so great, so wonderful, and he becomes even best friends with King Saul's son, Jonathan. He marries King Saul's daughter, Michal. And so the next 7 years are wonderful. But things begin to shift, and we've learned that over the last couple weeks, that Saul looks at David, looks at this kid basically, you know, he's growing up now, and he begins to get ticked off. He begins to get upset and angry because he's jealous. He sees that everybody loves David, nobody loves Saul. Everybody thinks that David is so wonderful, he has all these victories. And so David is scared for his life because Saul threatens him. I'm going to kill you, kid. You better get out of here. And so he runs. He becomes a fugitive for 8 years. He's running. He and a bunch of his men are on the run, just trying to stay alive. For 8 years, he's hiding out. He's keeping his distance from the Philistines, staying away from the king. 8 years, and the whole time, David knows, God, you got something for me. God, I'm going to trust you. God, this is tough. God, this is hard. But God, I'm going to trust you. And the one overwhelming lesson that David learned through this whole time in the wilderness, it's this. It's not about him. It's not about me. God, it's about you. It's about your ways. It's about your will. It's about, God, your timing. How many of you know it's hard to wait on God? Isn't it? How many of you had to wait on God? Maybe you're in a season of waiting even now. You're waiting on God, and you're like, God, where are you? And sometimes it's so tempting, isn't it, to take matters in our own hands, to just take those steps. And God, you know, you're not coming through for me, so I'm going to speed you up a little bit. And so oftentimes, and many of you could testify, that when we get in the way of God, we mess it up. We cause chaos in our lives, and we cause chaos in the lives of others when we decide to take matters into our own hands. And the thing of it is that David had the opportunity more than once to kill King Saul. You see, if he killed King Saul, if King Saul were to be dead, then that would elevate David to be the king of Israel. That's what he was anointed to do, after all, isn't it? Wasn't he supposed to be the king? One time, David and his men were hiding out. They're so scared. They're hiding out from King Saul. You know, they're always on the run. They're inside this cave, and Saul and his armies are out there constantly trying to find David, to kill David, because he was a threat. And so he's out there trying to find him, and it was a time where King Saul was like, you know, I got to stop for a minute, man. I don't know what I ate last night. Maybe it's some bad pizza or something, but I got to use the restroom. Have you ever been there before? You're like, you ate something, and it's like, dear Jesus, pull over right now, all right? So the army's like, okay, we got to wait for the king, you know. He's got to go to the bathroom. I didn't make this stuff up. This is in the Bible, all right? Some of you are like, what are you saying? No, he had to use the restroom, all right? So they arrived right here at the cave, the very cave that David and his men are in. So Saul gets off of his donkey and it proceeds to do his business right there in the mouth of the cave, all right? He goes in where it's dark. You don't want anybody seeing, okay? So, but David and his men, their eyes have already adjusted to the darkness, okay? They're in there, but Saul's eyes had not been adjusted. And so he's there, and David's men are like, David, now's your chance. I mean, Saul couldn't be in a more vulnerable position. You could kill him. Look, God has delivered him right here to us. Go, David, go, David. And David almost falls for it. He creeps up, you know what Saul's doing his business there, and he's about to kill him, to really kill him, and he realizes at the last moment, wait a minute, no, I can't do this. I can't kill him. I've already blown it once. I've already messed things up, taken matters into my own hands. And so Saul finishes. He gets back on his donkey, and they're about to leave. And David pops out of the cave, right at the mouth of the cave, and everyone in Saul's army, they knew that David was there and that David could actually have taken Saul's life, but he chose not to. And he's there at the mouth of the cave, and David's like, yoo-hoo, yoo-hoo, Saul. I'm making stuff up right here now, okay? But you get the gist of it. And all the guys look, and David says, may the Lord judge between you and me. I'm not going to be the judge. May the Lord judge between you and me. May he avenge the wrongs you have done to me. But my hand will not touch you. Although everybody behind me and in front of me knows that I have every right to take Saul's life, your life, Saul, to defend my own. You know, sometimes, guys, we get into a situation where we're right. I mean, we're 100% right, and we know it. I mean, we are absolutely 100% right. Listen, sometimes you can be 100% right and 100% wrong at the same time. And here's the thing. David decided not to take matters into his own hands. There was another occasion a few months later, Saul and his army, they're in a desert. The desert of Ziph. The desert of Ziph had no trees. It had all these rolling hills, just a big, huge plain, all right? And David was like, guys, we got to make sure we keep an eye on where Saul and his armies are at all time. So I want you to go out and scout where they're out. And they discovered that Saul and his army were there in Ziph. And so these guys, the scouts, come back to David and say, we found them. They're out there. There's about 3,000 of them. They're out there. And so David went with a few of his men, and they hid behind one of these rolling hills, and they just began to watch. And as the sun went down, they saw that all of the armies were pitching their tents for the night, getting ready to go to sleep. And they noticed that Saul had pitched his tent in the middle of all of his army, okay? 3,000 of them. That's pretty much what the king would do. Don't you think that's a great idea? That the king would plant himself in the middle of all of his army, kind of like as a protection. And so David, he brought one of his friends with him, Abishai, and he says, man, Abishai, I'm getting an idea. It's kind of a bad idea. Abishai, are you with me? Well, sure, David, I guess. What's your bad idea? And so David says, listen, here's what we're going to do. You and I, we're going to go down there. What? Yeah, we're going to go down there. We're going to sneak in there, and we're going to go into Saul's tent. What? Yeah, that's exactly what they did. They snuck through all of the army, through all of the tents, and they went inside Saul's tent while he was sleeping. Absolutely crazy. Now, when I read this, immediately I thought back to when I was a freshman. We had an all-night party at the school. And at the school, on the campus, there was this house that was designated for one of the teachers to live in. And the teacher's name was Mr. Ukella. And nobody liked Mr. Ukella. I mean, he was rude. He was weird. I mean, you had one of those teachers, right? And I thought to myself, and I think it was my decision, I said to my friends, I said, let's go inside Mr. Ukella's house. It was midnight. They're surely all asleep, and let's just go spy on him, because we thought he was strange. We thought he was weird. And I was a stupid kid, all right? That was really bad of me, all right? Don't get any ideas, kids. This was bad, all right? So for some reason, they left their door unlocked, all right? So I went in first. My friend was with me, and we opened the door, and it was dark. And we didn't have, cell phone, the flashlight app or anything. We didn't have a flashlight. And we go inside, and everything's dark, and we hear this music, and it's coming from upstairs. And we go up. I can't believe I did this. We go up the stairs, and it's creaking. You could hear the creaks. We're like, oh my, we're going to get caught. Someone's going to call the police. I'm going to go to jail tonight. What am I doing in here? And so we go up the stairs very quietly. And there was a crack on the door, one of the doors, and you could see light coming through. And you hear this music, and Mr. Ukella was in there on the bed playing the guitar. I'm like, ah! And I scream, and we ran down the stairs, and we were running down, and he comes following after us. He's falling down the stairs. I've never run so fast in all of my life. He still did not know who went into his house that night. But anyways, that reminded me of this. And so David, he snuck in. I mean, imagine David sneaking in to Saul's tent, and he's got his bodyguard there even. Okay, this guy's supposed to be watching over to make sure that the king doesn't ever get hurt, okay? And so Abishai, he's with David, and he whispers to David, God has delivered your enemy to you, into your hands. You got this, David. Okay, you got to understand, okay, that when Saul, before he went to sleep, this is what kings would do if they were out, out on the run, out in the desert or wherever in the wilderness, traveling around. When they would pitch their tent, when they would sleep, they would take their sword or their spear, and they would put it into the ground beside their head where they were going to be sleeping. And so Abishai's like, there's the spear. Get the spear and kill Saul. And David's like, look, I know you got convictions, David. I know you got this religious conviction thing. But listen, if you don't do it, I'm going to do it. I'll take the spear. And he's whispering. Okay, I'm yelling. But he's whispering. Get the spear. And if you don't, I'll take it. I'll put it right through his heart. Because when he's dead, everybody's going to recognize that you're going to be the king. It's a done deal. Go, let's just do this. Let's kill him and let's get out of here. Listen, I'm skipping a bunch of stuff here, but you get the idea, all right? But David whispers back because he kind of comes to his senses. And he says, Abishai, don't destroy him. Who can lay a hand on the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? He's basically saying, I refuse to violate the will of God to gain the promise of God. I refuse to violate the will of God to gain the promise of God. I'm not doing it, buddy. I'm not doing it, and you're not doing it either. We got to get out of here. Hey, but before we do, let's have a little bit of fun. All right, he says to Abishai, take a spear. Grab this spear, okay? And I'll take the water jug. I'll take his water jug. And so they crept out of that tent through the army again. And just as the sun was coming up that morning, David had this great idea. He stood on the edge of the hillside there, and you could see David's silhouette, and he yells out, okay? He yells out, Abner, Abner, Abner. Now, Abner was the bodyguard, okay? And he's yelling out, Abner, you missing anything, Abner? I got the spear. I got the jug. And sure enough, Abner's like, oh my goodness, where is the spear? It's gone. He does have it. And he yells out, David yells out, Abner, you're the worst bodyguard there ever was. You're horrible. You stink. You're the worst guy ever. And then David disappears into the desert. And some of it I'm paraphrasing, obviously. But David and his men disappear into the desert. Do you all see that David did something? David refused to replace what God had put into place. For David, it was all about God's will, all about his way, all about God's timing. And moving ahead, eventually Saul and his son, Jonathan, they both get killed, okay? Actually, it was a battle with the Philistines, and it was a horrible, horrible battle. Jonathan gets killed, and Saul's about to be killed, and he knew he was about to be killed, and he actually kills himself. He drives a sword or a spear right through his heart, okay? But the interesting thing of it is that when David heard that King Saul was dead, he mourned. David mourned over Saul's death. He mourned over Jonathan's death. I can get that because he was his best friend. But it says that he mourns over King Saul's death as well. And here's the thing. At the time, Israel had 12 tribes. A lot of you already know that. They had 12 tribes. And one of the tribes was named Judah. And now that King Saul was dead and Jonathan was dead, who was supposed to be the next king after that, it was obvious that David was supposed to take the throne. But only one tribe recognized it. It was the tribe of Judah. The rest of the tribes, the 11 tribes that were left over, said, no, we don't recognize you, David, as the king over Israel. They recognized another one of King Saul's sons. His name was Ishbosheth. Say that 100 times. Ishbosheth. Ishbosheth. So for 7 years, this conflict goes on between the house of David and the house of King Saul. And the people are continually saying, David, go claim the throne. David, what are you doing? David, God has anointed you for such a time as this. But David kept saying, no, it's God's way, it's God's will, it's God's timing. And for 7 years this goes on. And finally, in 2 Samuel, you can look for yourself, 2 Samuel chapter 4, two brothers appear on the scene. Two brothers, and they go to Ishbosheth's house while he's sleeping, while he's taking a nap in his own bed. They murder him. They kill him because they knew David was supposed to be the king. So they kill him, and they chop off his head at that because they had to prove that this guy was dead. And that's what they did back then, okay? So they didn't have cell phones to take an iPhone to take a picture and send it over to King David, or send it over to David. So they chopped off the head, put it in a bag, took it over to David. They didn't want to drag the body. I mean, that's what they did. They took the head with them, and they brought it to David. They dumped the head off, and they were so proud. They were so excited. They're like, man, we're going to get a reward for this. This is going to be awesome. Here is the head of Ishbosheth, and here you go, David. And David's like, wait a minute. David said this, as surely as the Lord lives, who delivered me out of every trouble Basically saying, look, guys, you killed an innocent man. While he was in his own bed asleep, you killed him. Listen, the guy that brought me news about King Saul's death, I had that guy put to death. You're bringing me this news of an innocent man that you killed? You think this makes me happy? In David's mind, again, it was all about God's timing. It was all about God's will and God's way. Then David ordered to have these two brothers killed. Then he took that head, he took Ishbosheth's head, and he had it buried at a very special place in Abner's tomb in Hebron. That was a sign of honor to do that. And then jumping into chapter 5, it tells us that after all that happened, all the tribes got together, and they finally declared that David was the king of Israel. All hail King David! And after being a fugitive for 8 years and being at war for 7 more years, God's timing came about. When all the tribes gathered at Hebron, they said this to David. They said, in the past, while Saul was king over us, you were the one who led Israel on military campaigns. The Lord said to you, you will shepherd my people Israel, and you will become the ruler. It was no surprise. It was no mystery to them. Everybody knew that David was going to be the king. They just didn't understand, David, why didn't you just progress it? Why didn't you just make it happen sooner? Why didn't you seize the moment for yourself? He had every opportunity to take the throne, but he declined it. And at this very moment, when all the tribes were gathered together and all the elders were there, this was the time, at this very moment, that David showed his greatest moment ever, his true greatness. In this moment, David applies everything that he had learned in the wilderness. David showed extraordinary maturity. I want you to think about this. They're about to hand him power. The greatest influence. He was the greatest influence of all of Israel. He's the most powerful person in the room, even without a crown. And in this moment, the text tells us that David, King David, made a covenant with the people, with the 12 tribes. Everybody say covenant. A covenant is like a contract. It basically says, I'm going to do this if you do this. You do this, and I'll do this. It was an arrangement, an agreement that King David made with his people. He didn't need to do that. He was now the king. What he said was law. He didn't have to have this covenant with the people. Listen, I want to tell you something about David. David chose to do something different. He could have looked at those guys when he became king, because a lot of those elders, they were on the side of King Saul. They took his side. They wanted David dead. He could have looked at them and said, I want you dead, you dead, you dead, you dead, you dead. And no, he didn't do that. He chose something different. He chose to make a covenant with them. And this is so powerful. We're coming to a close here. So powerful. David recognized at this moment in public that he was a king, yes, but a king under authority. He was submitting to the people that he was ruling over. He was saying, I know that I'm your king, but I'm not the true king. God is the true king. Remember, those of you who were here in the last few weeks, David was never confused about who God was, where God was, that God was always the king over Israel. But here's the thing, and we're closing here. David waited 15 years for a promise that God gave to him when he was in middle school. And during that time, David learned some valuable lessons that would make him the greatest king that Israel would ever have. There's a lot we can learn out of this story here. If you're a leader here today, if you're a boss, and you're thinking to yourself, man, there's some really profound stuff in here, some really good stuff in here that we can apply to our lives, But the most overwhelming thing here, I guess the highlighted thing in the story, isn't for us to say, well, maybe I can use some of that stuff in my life. No. You see, as Christians, as a follower of Jesus Christ, what David did at this moment, this greatest moment of his life, is actually required of us. The kind of greatness that David displayed, if you are a follower of Jesus, it's not enough for us to just think, man, what an inspiring story that is, and maybe I can use part of that in my life. No, it's actually required. Here's why I say that. You see, 1,000 years later, after that moment, in the city of Jerusalem, which is not too far from Hebron, Jesus shows up. And Jesus himself would model this very same greatness in a very unusual way. You see, it was John in the New Testament. John saw it. He saw what Jesus did, and his mind just went crazy. And he saw it, and he was an eyewitness, and he wrote about what Jesus did. You see, it was just before Passover, and Jesus had gathered all of his disciples together. And Passover was an incredible time in Jerusalem with thousands of people would gather together. They were celebrating victory over their independence of getting out of Egypt as slaves. And so Jesus said, I want to go celebrate with my disciples. And so they went to a special room. They went up together. And as they were finishing up the Passover meal, John tells us that Jesus knew. He knew at that moment, that very moment, that the hour had come for him to leave the world and to go to be with his Father. Jesus knew that in just a short time he was going to be arrested, that he was going to be put on trial, that he would have a cross and he would go up to Calvary and they would crucify him on that cross. And this is after being chased all through Judea and Galilee by people for 3 years who rejected him as the Messiah. He'd be arrested by those whom he would save. He'd be crucified by the same. And like David, Jesus had been anointed by God to establish a covenant as well. And this is so cool to see the connection of the Old and the New Testament. And this covenant that Jesus would establish would be a new covenant. That the old covenant would not be there. That now, just between God and God was there, and it wasn't just between the 12 tribes of Israel, but between the whole world and God. Jesus would initiate a brand new covenant between God and all of mankind, that they wouldn't need the blood of an animal anymore for their sacrifices, but Jesus' blood would be sufficient. And at this moment, and all the disciples were with him in that room, and he knew that the end had come, and he recognized, this is it. This is the special moment. And John said that Jesus knew that the Father had put all things, everything under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. And at this moment, Jesus had all the power. He had the power without the crown. He had the authority without the title. He was holding all the cards, and he recognized that God had put all things under his authority. And the text said that he got up. He got up. And here's the question. What would you do? What do you do when you hold all the cards, when you hold the authority, when you're the most powerful person in the room? What do you do? What would you do if you had the whole world in your hands at that moment? And John says he got up. He got up after the meal, and he took off his outer clothing, and he wrapped a towel around his waist. And the disciples were like, no, no, Jesus, no, don't. What are you doing, Jesus? Jesus, put it back on. Put your outer clothing back on. We've got people to do what you're about to do. They knew what Jesus was going to do. We have servants, Jesus, that can do that. Jesus, no, you're our master. You're our rabbi. Jesus, no. Put the outer clothes back on. And Jesus took the basin, and he took the pitcher of water, and he knelt. The Bible tells us, John tells us, he recorded it for us, that he began to wash the feet of the disciples. Washing their feet. And it was so uncomfortable. You could almost hear the groans in the room. And after Jesus was done washing all of their feet, he went back to that hook and grabbed his robe, proving that yes, he was a rabbi, and put it back on and sat down. You see, Jesus, he was teaching us, he was teaching the disciples as well as us the greatest lesson ever. Jesus said this, now that I, your Lord and your teacher, I have washed your feet, you should also wash each other's feet. I've set the example. I've modeled it for you. I've showed you how to do it. And if I'm not too good to wash your feet, you're not too good to wash another's feet. So guys, he would say, and I think he would say this to all of us, those of us who are Christ followers, he would say this. In those moments in your life where you think you're something, when you think you've got it all together, when you think you are just handed the keys to something great, or you're introduced to the corner office with all the windows and you get the opportunity of a lifetime, and they set that crown on your head, at that moment, look around you for somebody's feet to wash. And for some of you, for most of us, you wear a crown. Did you know that? If you're a husband, you wear a crown. If you're a wife, you wear a crown. A mother, a father, a manager, an owner, a teacher, a coordinator, an organizer, a captain of a team. Some of you are a big brother, some of you are a big sister. Maybe you're a board member, administrator. There are points in our life where we are given authority. And we've got to remember that when we are given that authority, we are to embrace the greatness that David learned and that Jesus modeled for us. That when you are the most powerful person in the room, you are to use your leverage, your power. You're to use your power to benefit those who are around you. This is what David learned. This is what Jesus tells us that we're to do. In fact, Jesus said, the Son of Man, even the Son of Man, did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life a ransom for many. We're going to celebrate in just a few moments water baptism, some lives who've recognized that Jesus is their Lord, that Jesus is their master, that Jesus calls the shots in their life now, no longer living for themselves, but choosing to put their hands in the life of their God. Some of you in this room are at a stage in your life where you're waiting on God, and you're tempted to take things in your own hands. I want to encourage you to wait on Him. He is faithful. He is faithful. His plans are perfect. For all of us in this room, friends, we are to serve each other. You want to have a great marriage? Come on. Your marriage struggling right now? You want to have a great marriage? Learn to serve your husband. Learn to serve your wife. Outdo each other. Serve each other. That's what makes a great marriage. You want to have a great relationship with someone? Don't have this attitude, well, I deserve it because I've done this, I've done that, and I deserve it. You serve. The greatest one around us is the one who serves the most. Amen?